Hey guys, Script Skynet here. How you doing? Love you. Guys, Rudy Bowen tweeted, and he makes these statements that are so encouraging, and there's implying that there's something in the works for DigiByte, and there is. Now there's a bunch of pieces to show the picture of this puzzle, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take the puzzle and build up the edges of the puzzle and start developing the picture in the middle, so we can kind of see clearly what this might be. So let's read this. DigiByte will be on the front line of the technological revolution, expanding its horizons, where many others have to drop out. We will further grow organically. We know what is needed. We're not here for a quick buck or the short term, but to make a permanent change for humanity. Now, I was reading this other night, and trust me, just bear with me, all the pieces will come into place. Congress approves data access outside of the United States called the Cloud Act, but the EU may not like it. Now, this is about the data storage stored in Germany and New Zealand. The Europeans are very much into data protection these days with their new General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. They will not likely like the Cloud Act. Hatch and Collins, the sponsors, have likely stoked the flames that are already burning high after Facebook's data mishandling and the Cambridge Analytica data scandal. It is a safe bet that almost no one has read the final version of the Cloud Act in the final hours of the budget talks. It is likely, but not certain, that the Cloud Act has settled the legal issues before the U.S. Supreme Court in the Microsoft case. Wherever this case may be going, thanks to the Cloud Act, a U.S. cloud provider cannot raise the argument anymore that it is prohibited from producing overseas data by the GDPR, assuming the provider has possession, custody, or control of the data, which is often the case. Number 2, comedy is a diplomatic term to be polite to other nations. The mentioned comedy analysis is the Cloud Act is not polite. It does not mention the existing assistant treaties, MLATs, that the U.S. has negotiated with other nations. The judge doesn't even need to ask the parties about them. It is not necessary that U.S. law enforcement must initiate a judicial parties about them. It is not necessary that U.S. law enforcement must initiate judicial assistance procedure with the foreign state through a MLAT before a warrant can be served. The United States has apparently abandoned the existing bureaucratic and time-consuming MLAT process and has created a new unilaterally imposed U.S. domestic court alternative process. Number 3, law enforcement may applaud this, but what comes next? And here is where it really becomes legally and politically delicate. Only a qualifying foreign government benefits from the comedy analysis. This is a government that has an executive agreement for legal cooperation with the U.S. and has laws which provide to electronic communication service providers and remote computing service providers opportunities similar to those provided under paragraphs 2 and 5. This provision is meant to give the U.S. government political leverage, move other countries to enter each into an executive agreement with the United States that the U.S. Attorney General then certifies as compliant. The process should be expected to be very time-consuming and onerous. The EU and its member states doesn't have an executive agreement with the U.S. and does not provide for a judicial review process similar to the Cloud Act. Only a qualifying foreign government can gain access to data that are located in the United States. Only such government can even play a role in the comedy analysis. Thus, the EU gains nothing from the Cloud Act. If there is no such qualifying foreign government, the U.S. judge's role seemingly would be to affirm the search warrant of subpoena sought by U.S. governmental authorities and order compliance therewith. Now here's where it gets interesting. This new Article 48, which will enter into full force on May 26, recently happened, is straightforward. U.S. law enforcement need to go through an MLAT before it can access EU-based data. A mere executive agreement under the amended SCA as a legal basis is not sufficient. An executive agreement can be almost everything. a mere letter exchange, a mutual understanding, and a document that can be revoked at any time, etc. Another sticky point is the Cloud Act uses the term U.S. persons. So if the Supreme Court judge says, hey, I'm issuing the Cloud Act to find out documents about this U.S. persons, here's what the EU says. The GDPR uses the term data subject, the latter with no relevance whatsoever of the nationality or the place of residence. In short, the Cloud Act and the GDPR don't match. The consequence, providers that comply with the U.S. warrant under the SCA could be subject to a huge fine under the GDPR. Even if the U.S. judge ordered compliance under the authority of the amended SCA, during the mentioned appeal process, the U.S. judge would likely not even hear an arguments based on the GDPR as long as the relevant EU members state where the data are located is not a qualified foreign government. Not many experts in Brussels had an idea that the Cloud Act would piggyback on the budget law. Without further debate and thought, the pending case at the U.S. Supreme Court has been in their focus, but this court proceeding may now be moot. Whether the existing MLATs can now be buried in favor of the executive agreements and what the Cloud Act means for the EU, U.S. Privacy Shield remain everyone's guess. I stated this to say, in short, that the data that's being stored in other countries are being controlled by courts, and any government can summons data on somebody. So the Supreme Court of the United States issued the Cloud Act to usurp over GDPR's protection of their citizens, and the EU aren't having it. So there's a stalemate going on, and here is where it all comes together. And Rudy tweeted, a total solution is in the works, and it's called Soyo ID, powered by DigiByte blockchain, thanks to Soft Tech and Antim ID. And he's highlighting Andrea Servida Andrea, which is the commissioner of the EU for data security. And yeah, right there, we're focused on it. It's an article he tweeted. He tweeted an article about identity and digital identity as an investment. Now, I was going through this and I didn't see anywhere about what Rudy was talking about with DigiByte. So I had to go back and, what did I miss? So it's Soyo ID. I missed it, guys. So there's what it is. Let's read on. Soyo ID. At this moment, the Soyo ID website is being directed to Veritas ID. That was the original idea of having a blockchain validated online ID. Remember? I remember Veritas. Covered it several times in a previous video. That didn't get off the ground, but thanks to Softtech and their sponsoring of the DigiByte Foundation, it's rebranded to Soyo. So there you have it. It's Soyo ID. And Soyo ID, in its header on Twitter, says coming soon, the DigiByte Self-Sovereign Identity, the SSI app, and Zero Knowledge Proof, ZKP, developed by the DigiByte Foundation and Softtech. Okay, the SSI, Self-Sovereign Identity. Now, when I read that article, I saw the SSI in there. So it didn't exactly say DigiByte, but it's stating the Soyo ID SSI, Self-Sovereignty Identity. And that is this article that Servida Andrea Servida, digital identity as an investment. So let's get into it. Trustworthy digital identification remains one of the main challenges of the internet because none of the traditional offline methods of verifying that someone is who they claim to be apply. Yet, while digital identity is one of the most foundational and valuable digital assets we have, made even more apparent by the pandemic, many people question whether there is a business to be built around it. Policymakers and governments are instrumental in developing the foundational identities upon which functionality identity can be further developed by the private sector. Functionality identities require a different framework in which persistence may not be a desirable quality, as users may want to isolate different online interactions and prevent correlation in order to preserve privacy or operate under multiple pseudonyms. Microsoft has put forth a framework that involves primary persistence and non-pairwise, non-persistent digital identifiers to allow for this flexibility. Functional identity is often monetized in its ways that are extractive. Here we go, guys, the solution. Both forms of digital identity can be provisioned and verified using centralized or decentralized methods. Decentralized digital identity is often referred to as self-sovereign identity, SSI. There it is, DigiByte, Soyo, and exhibits the principles identified by Christopher Allen below. Proponents of SSI advocate for an architecture in which the user owns and controls their own identification data to be provisioned out to service providers. This stands in contrast to the current system in which each service provider replicates and re-verifies a user's data. Oftentimes, SSI leverages distributed ledger technology. That's right, Soyo ID, DigiByte. So nothing new to the DigiByte community and people that know about DigiByte security, but this is Christopher Allen's 10 principle of self-sovereign identity, can summarize in 10 words grouped into 3 sections: security, controllability, and portability. So yeah, security for protection, controllability and existence, persistence, control, consent, and portability, with transparency, access through any mobile device. Now, the SSI is not to be confused with federated identity systems, which encompasses single sign-on, SSO. SSO sign-in with Google, Facebook, Apple, and the likes. Attempts to create one onboarding process that grants access across sites and services, but results in the accumulation of a large amount of personal data by a single authenticating party. Which finally comes to the last paragraph. Why does digital identity matter? At the most basic level, foundational identity consists of data points that are recorded on birth certificates, passports, and state-issued IDs. The problem is, these forms of identification require the maintenance of physical artifacts, and an increasingly digital world are completely reliant upon central authorities that issue and validate them, and are susceptible to theft and fraud. So remember, Rudy tweeted, for DigiByte to keep up, to grow, and to be on the front line of this blockchain technology revolution, it's important to build a bridge from an idealistic decentralized world to a profit-driven centralized commercial world, connecting both worlds without compromising values. And that's how you solve this problem. This is the big news, guys. This is what DigiByte needs. It's going to solve some real problems moving forward in the future, and it's doing it today. When you start connecting the dots, these are the players today that's making it happen right here for the EU. Not to forget Softech or the DigiByte Foundation. So rolling out from DigiByte is Soyo ID, validate and verify online profiles, and it's going to be used through the EU, and it's going to solve massive security problems and individual security issues and ID, period. Now they truly do have the power in their hands. Our platform partners, DigiByte, Softech, VID, and Antum ID, just like I said, with Soyo ID, solving real-world use cases without blurring the lines and keeping it completely compliant between nations upon nations. Now, here's a recap of what VID is all about, partnered with Softech, IBM, DigiByte, and so many others, but let's check it out.